My name is Mandy Stokes, and I'm going to be your speaker for today. This is the Understanding Addiction Causes and Recovery webinar, something that's really close to my heart. I'm a registered social worker, an addictions counselor, and also an educator at SACAP. And I also have sort of like my own story, which I'll kind of weave into the rest of our webinar here. So yes, why this matters, okay? Why are we having this webinar? Definitely for myself, being a person in sustained recovery, if I didn't get the help that I needed, I wouldn't be here today doing what I'm doing. When we look at addiction spans all ages and income, geography, it doesn't matter where you come from, it doesn't discriminate. When you get addicted, it's like, you can't really help that you have actually kind of fallen into that system, okay? It's not just the person with the addiction that gets affected, it's also the families, the schools, workplaces, and our communities get affected. Recent research has shown that there's an escalation of addiction in South Africa, and we really do need to do something about this. And then something else that's really important for me to say is that it's a public health issue. It's not a moral one. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. I mean, this is like a snapshot of what's going on in South Africa. But what I'd like to do now is to actually just do a little poll for you to look at, to answer two questions. It's anonymous, so we're not going to know who says what here. Do you know someone struggling with addiction, or are you struggling with addiction? Yes, no, or unsure. For the addiction one, for someone struggling with addiction, yes or no. 74% saying no to themselves struggling with addiction, and 87% saying they know someone struggling with addiction. Okay. Good. So it sort of shows the stats that we have here. So let me go back to our snapshot of South Africa. Snapshot of South Africa is that there's been approximately 13% saying no to knowing someone. Okay, so a lot of us know someone who's struggling with addiction. 90%, thank you for being honest, saying that you're struggling with addiction. No, and then I'm not sure. So you know what? That's the whole thing. Like I explained when we were going through it, that addiction can be anything, and we don't have to actually hit rock bottom. There's something else that I'll touch on a little bit later. If we look at South Africa, the current research that's been circulating, plus minus 15% of South Africans have a drug problem. Drug use has increased 7-fold in the last 15 years. It used to be, so South Africa is much higher, and at some point, like when I got into recovery, it was it was lower, okay? So definitely the problem is getting worse. 36% of youth report substance use annually, and that was in the youth research report that they did. The average age of first use of experimenting is plus minus 12 years old, which is terrifying if you think about it. And then they've linked 60 to 80% of crime to substance abuse or alcohol, so it's not just street drugs, it's also alcohol abuse that kind of goes within that. So what is addiction? They call it a brain disease, and it's a chronic relapsing condition characterized by compulsive use, loss of control, cravings and preoccupation, and continued use despite negative consequences. So for most of us, if you think about, even if you take your smartphone, okay, there's a compulsion in using your smartphone. And eventually you get a little bit like annoyed with yourself. You want to stop doing it. But yet, never mind the fact that you keep on picking up the phone and maybe going through newsreels that make you feel terrible. So there's negative consequences. You still pick up the phone and you do the same thing again. And similarly, an addiction to a substance, it maybe starts off with being quite exciting, but eventually it becomes a compulsive thing. You lose control, you lose your job. You can't live life without it. So what addiction is not? It is not a moral failure or a lack of willpower. So a lot of sort of myths surround when people look, it's like, why can't they just stop using, they choose, and kind of blaming them, they choosing to do this. They should just stop. Why can't they just stop? Like I managed to just stop whatever. However, quite often when we say we've managed to stop, so there's a lot of things we don't stop, okay, because we are hooked into whatever cycle it is that we are in. Talks about needing more discipline. A lot of people that end up being addicted are very disciplined, but the substances have taken over their decision-making capabilities. Some people think that you can only get addicted to hard drugs like heroin or crack cocaine or crystal meth. However, there are people going into treatment for alcohol, for cannabis, for excessive cell phone use, for gambling. So there's a whole lot of things that we can get addicted to. And the last one, which can be quite damaging, is they must hit rock bottom. Quite often with hot rock bottom, if we don't step in as family or community to help people, if we leave them to hit rock bottom and learn their own lesson, a lot of people end up overdosing and dying. Okay, so it is a life-threatening illness that we are actually dealing with here. And because, and I'll explain to you a little bit later in terms of the neurobiology that happens, where we actually lose the capability of making sane decisions for ourselves. So, an explanation of why willpower is not enough. Substances hijack the brain's reward system. So we use substances and it makes us feel good. That feel good comes from dopamine. When I put cocaine or even alcohol or marijuana into my system, of course I like it. It's a good feeling. But if I keep on using it, my brain forgets how to release the dopamine on its own. Okay, so normal pleasure actually stops working. So even though previously I maybe enjoyed going for a hike in nature and that made me feel so good, now I want to go for a hike in nature with smoking some marijuana. Okay, and eventually it's like walking in nature is just not pleasurable anymore, because we are kind of boosting our dopamine so much. Okay, eventually we come down from it, and when we come down from it, our normal system of working, tolerating our stress, that also needs to work harder now, because you've got this vast difference between, oh wow, I'm so carefree on the one side, to geez, life is so tough on the other. And the more we do that, okay, the more the substances make us feel better and make life appear easier, the more our brain goes like, well, you know what, actually, I think it's more important that we use the substance over, you don't really think about what the negative consequences are, or, eventually getting to a place of like, why should I buy bread? So there was I met a Dr. Shisa who did research on how alcohol and tobacco, purchases, okay, and addiction as such impact children. And the research that he did kind of showed that people, even on that 300 Rand grant, were spending money on alcohol and drugs and cigarettes instead of buying food. Okay, so that is prioritizing the substance over survival, like a classic example of that. So we can explain what happens in the brain using sort of a three stage. Okay, so we binge use or we get intoxicated, and what that affects is our reward and habit circuits, what they call the basal ganglia area of our brain. So within that, that's where your dopamine gets released. That's where serotonin was also there, and and it's where we form habits. Okay, we form habits, and I mean, I don't know if anyone ever read that book about the micro habits or the atomic habits. Okay, because within that, like, it talks about the best way to establish a habit is to add it onto something that you're already doing. And if you think about when people start using drugs and they start getting intoxicated, it's like, oh, it's nice, I'll do it maybe once a month. Then it's like every second weekend. Then it's every weekend. Then it's, well, now my weekend starts on Friday. And then my weekend only ends on Tuesday. And it just becomes kind of added on there. Then if we go through the withdrawal, okay, or the negative effect that happens, that is in our extended amygdala, okay? The amygdala is our fear center. That's where our anxiety comes from. So we take away the substances, we start feeling coming down from the drugs. We're going to be more stressed, we're going to be more anxious. And they quite often talk about, you know, that we're in survival mode, okay, when we in that cycle of addiction, because it's not we're not necessarily making the best decisions, okay, which is going to the next one, which is the preoccupation and impaired decision making. And that's our prefrontal cortex. Our prefrontal cortex is the last part of our brain to actually develop. So that's why teenagers are at such risk for addiction, because they've got, they often talk about, you know, that they've got an accelerator but no brake system. Our prefrontal cortex is our brake system. So if you put substances in and get caught up in that cycle of addiction and pleasure reward cycle, but you can't actually see that there's consequences and you don't stop it, then the addiction develops much quicker in a young adolescent's brain. So I hope that explains a little bit why it's so difficult to stop. It's not necessary. It's not something that I can just go, you know what, I'm going to put this down here. If I've been using for 14 years, okay, and now it's like, you know what, like it's really getting in my way. I'm not able to actually pay my rent. I can't do this. I can't do that, okay, and I want to stop, but I'm unable to because my brain is saying, you know what, you can't survive without the drug. And that's why I keep on going and doing that again. So in that way, when we talk about early intervention and, if you said, a lot of people say they actually know people that are struggling with addiction, and it's not about saving them. So you don't want to be codependent and try and save the whole world, but it's about providing them with the resources to be able to get the help that they need. And in that process, also for you to learn how to set your own boundaries so that you don't enable the person's addiction to continue. So they call addiction a chronic relapsing illness, okay? But so is diabetes and asthma and even like heart disease, okay? Addiction is a chronic condition. We have to put in the maintenance in order to stay in recovery. Similarly, someone with diabetes and asthma and heart conditions need to put in the maintenance in order to stay healthy. Research that they've done is that the relapse rates between people relapsing from their addiction is similar to that of diabetes and asthma. So they've got relapse rates of 40 to 60%. However, people do get, like, if you relapse and you don't allow yourself to go back down that whole cycle, you are able to get back into recovery after the relapse. The relapse is not failure. It's about what in our plan needs adjusting in order to ensure that we can actually sustain recovery. And an example of that would be, someone works in a high stress job, for example, and they started using cocaine to kind of cope with everything that's going on there. And they have a tendency of not setting boundaries and taking on more and more work. They go into rehab, they come out, they feel like Captain Recovery and everything is great, okay? Then they go back into the work environment that's stressful, and they still don't set boundaries. They don't want to use, okay, but they don't set boundaries, and the stress gets more and more and more. And eventually they go, you know what? I said I'm just going to do 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. If I have a line of coke, I'm going to be able to get through it. So when they relapse like that, they go speak to their counselor, or they go to an NA or an AA group, and they speak about what's happened. People say, it's like, so what do you think led to the relapse? And it's not necessarily that he wanted to use. The reason is he needs to learn how to say no, and he needs to learn how to take care of himself. And there's so many different examples that we can talk about within that. You can maybe ask me questions about that later. So what are the risk factors that could lead to addiction? But again, I'm saying this, but I also know, and I'll give you some examples of where people got addicted where there's not really any of these things, okay? So it's been well researched that there's a genetic component that makes you more vulnerable to developing addiction. So a family history of addiction, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you will get addicted just because your grandfather and your father are addicted. Poverty and employment plays a huge role, okay, especially in South Africa. Because as I gave the example that Dr. Shiza said, it's, people using their 300 Rand grant to buy alcohol and cigarettes. So that doesn't stop. Lack of money doesn't stop people from using, because with poverty and with unemployment comes a sense of not having purpose, not having meaning, low self-esteem, and the drugs and the alcohol and the cigarettes make you feel better. High trauma exposure, definitely in South Africa, we sometimes don't even realize, like with the news and articles and all of that, that we all either directly or indirectly exposed to a lot of violence and crime in our country. Early substance use before the age of 15, as I explained before. An adolescent's mind is just so open and ready to become addicted because they are thrill seeking, they're chasing that high, and they don't have the breaks to say, you know what, I'm just going to test it once. Okay, it's good, and I'm going to do it again and again. And your brain is just more vulnerable to addiction. Mental health challenges, depression, anxiety, bipolar, schizophrenia quite often develops after people have used marijuana. But a lot of people will start using, they've got depression, they've got anxiety, so they use the substances as opposed to going and seeing a doctor or a psychologist or a social worker and saying, I'm really struggling with this. So they self-medicate and then end up, because there's a vulnerability with the mental health condition, you kind of fall into that trap. Easy access to substances. And this could be either living in a community where there's a lot of access to substances, or going to a school where there's lots of access, or having too much money to spend as a young person. I've heard of a lot of people that once they start working, they start earning their own money, the temptation is there. It's like, oh, wow. And people are going for drinks after work. And, then they started having a line of Coke. And then the next minute they know they fall into that cycle of addiction. And then we also have quite a normalized alcohol culture, okay, which is another interesting thing that was said to me like 26 years ago. And it was again quoted recently, which is that there's actually only 30% of South Africa drinks. The other 60% don't drink. Okay, well, 40%. Okay, so I always thought about I'm drinking because everyone else is drinking, and no, actually, there's more people not drinking than there are people that are drinking. So what we want to do is to actually, to try and intervene a little bit earlier. So what we can look out for in our loved ones is, that like when people start getting secretive or they start withdrawing, from their loved ones, like teenager locks themselves in the room, all those that's very kind of normal behavior, okay, but it is about kind of popping in and checking and what's going on. And also, like, with teenagers, it's about looking at the school environment and engaging with teachers to also find out, like, is the behavior the same in the school context, okay? And within the school context, the teachers can also give you insight into whether they have moved to a different peer group as such, okay? For people that are working and living on their own, and I've worked with I've spoken to some family members who, like they always used to call me every week, and now they hardly ever call me, or I can't get hold of them. Their phones are always off, so those are sort of warning signs to look at. Then mood or behavior changes, like either being ecstatically happy and nothing ever bothers them, to being extremely depressed, being quite resentful, and like a difference in that sort of mood and behavior that you've seen. In schoolwork, you can see it quite clearly that grades start dropping. Same thing gets seen in the employment, in the workplace, that someone that used to do really well and handed in all their work on time actually start not being able to meet those targets. And even in your friend circle, that sometimes, you know, some friends just stop kind of interacting with everyone else. And, you know, it's normally like a warning sign, like what is going on, you know, to try and see what, you know, if there's some way that you could support the person to maybe either get honest or, you know, even if it's not a substance abuse thing, like if someone just leaves your friend group, it's, you know, it's about reaching out and saying, you know, like, is everything okay? And not just going, oh, well, we've like let them go. And then financial problems also, eventually you get there, even though you start, like people start off, they've got a lot of money because they've now started a new job, they've got an increase. With increase comes, and the promotion comes more stress. And then the next minute they start not being able to meet the daily obligations. You know, they can't pay rent, they can't buy food, they start borrowing money from people. Maybe initially they actually give the money back, then they don't give the money back. So that also highlights. And then when we get to further down the addiction cycle, quite often it's, you know, it's lack of sleep, lack of appetite, and lack of, like, you know, your hygiene practices also change. You know, people get so stuck in getting and using drugs that they don't really take care of themselves in the process. So recovery is possible. So here is another poll for you. I want to ask, who is in recovery from addiction? And do you know someone who's in recovery from addiction? Just to get us an idea of what's going on for you. I mean, something I didn't even realize when I went into rehab the first time, it was, you know, I didn't even realize that there was something called Narcotics Anonymous that could help you. I didn't think I was ever going to be able to clean up, but people stay clean. I've seen that. And the other thing that I've seen is that, you know, just because I cleaned up a certain way doesn't mean that everyone else has to clean up the same way I did. And one of the key things that helps people to stay in recovery is having support from their family, from their community, from the workplace. Good. Awesome. 16% in recovery. Yay, 68. That's great. Okay, so this is, for me, it's like it's proof. It works. Recovery is possible. And, you know, and that we don't kind of have to stay stuck in that identity of always being a mess and always being, you know, once an addict, always an addict kind of thing. But similarly, we also need to know that we are vulnerable as recovering people, and not to go and, you know, think that everything is fine. Like the same way a diabetic doesn't all of a sudden one day decide, you know what, I don't want to be a diabetic anymore. You know what, I'm going to eat chocolate cake and I'm going to eat this and whatever, and like whatever happens, I don't care. Similarly, if we decide as people in recovery, you know, well, you know, that was a past thing. You know, I'm going to have a little drink or a little this, I'm going to find myself in a bit of trouble there. So what actually sustains recovery? So I was very curious about this when, because I got into recovery and then I went and I did an addictions. I did, was like a trainee addictions counselor. Eventually I went and studied social work. And I was like, so how come some people stay clean and some people don't stay clean? So when I did my master's, I actually interviewed people in sustained recovery that cleaned up through different pathways, all in South Africa. They were all more than 3 years clean. And I found that there was, you know, there were like similarities, okay? The similarity means like there was some kind of turning point or crisis where the person said, you know what, I want to change my life, okay? And they were willing to actually accept the help. There was some kind of psychological or spiritual shift within them. They all cited that they had some kind of ongoing support, whether that was Narcotics Anonymous or Alcoholics Anonymous fellowships, the church, other support groups, you know, like attending SADC, going and doing community work, actually speaking to a psychologist or social worker or someone, okay, but they have that support to help them in their recovery. They all acquired active coping strategies to deal with not just not picking up the drug, okay, but to deal with assertiveness, to deal with boundaries, to deal with being shy, okay, building their own self-esteem. Like there's a lot of things that we need to do in order to be able to sustain our recovery. And one of the key things there is helping others. So if we look at recovery pathways in South Africa, we've got support groups, and I've put here AA, NA, GA, and SADC, but I think SANCA also does some of that. A lot of churches do their own sort of support groups of substance abuse. And the things are there. Quite often the person that has the addiction can't really see it. They don't know where to look. They feel kind of stuck, okay? But as a person who knows someone who has a problem, you can maybe suggest some of these avenues. There are also outpatient centers where the person doesn't have to go and sleep over. They can go in during the day, and it varies in intensity. So some of them will be once a week. Some of them will be, 3 days a week. Some of them will be 5 days a week. And in essence, and some of it is private, some of it is free, some of it's government run. And there are actually two really amazing projects. The one in Pretoria is called COSUP, and they deal with, it's a harm reduction approach. They have a needle exchange. They help people to come off the heroin and to, maybe to start using methadone or Suboxone. And then in Cape Town, they've opened up quite a lot of matrix model groups that has been very effective with crystal meth tic problem, and people that are using heroin and other drugs as well. And that is it's like a 12-week, I think, that they have there. And I've met people. I live in Pretoria, and I've met people that have gotten the help through COSUP, and it's been really beneficial for them. And for me, it would be great if we could have more of those centers across the country. That makes recovery just a little bit more accessible for everyone. And then inpatient centers. Again, we've got private, we've got SANCA, which is partially funded, state facilities, faith-based centers, and psychiatric facilities. And those are the places, like when I interviewed my research participants, they cleaned up through all of these things. Okay, there was a mix of this. There was not just one that actually provided the only service for this. And then alternatively, if you want to just kind of actually, you can engage just with a professional, okay, on an individual level, okay, and to see perhaps just having that safe person to talk to, whether they be a state psychologist or a private social worker, or someone working at an NGO that provides you with a platform to kind of start your recovery from. So there are resources available. So a lot of research has gone into what actually works for addiction treatment. And obviously amongst everyone, there's sometimes a debate about this one is better than that, whatever. I'm of the opinion that we really need to work with what works for the client, okay, in that given situation. So we've got cognitive behavioral approaches that fairly standard across, I think, any of the treatment centers or any professionals that work with people with addiction. And you can even slot in there the 12-step program that's also cognitive, but also a spiritual process that people go through. Then there's a harm reduction approach. And with that, it's not necessarily about asking someone to abstain completely from their substance, but in small little increments, trying to get them to reduce the amount of harm they're doing to themselves and the people around them. And quite often what we do with that is, like, as you start reducing the harm and you start maybe getting a bit more control over what decisions you make, you may get to the place where you go, you know what, actually, I don't want to use that all anymore. Medication-assisted treatment, we have that for opioids and for alcohol. So, that's what COSUP's all about. They actually do provide prescriptions for opioid replacement therapy so that people can instead of having to hustle for heroin, they can access at an affordable rate the replacement therapy, and it reduces. They don't have to go through the withdrawal. It reduces criminality, and in essence, it does improve quality of life. And then there's obviously medication that people take for alcohol that prevents them from if they do drink, that they get very sick. Just to be careful. I mean, only doctors will prescribe this. And then, yes, using an integrated mental health care approach is really important, because substance use disorder is a mental health disorder, and it often co-occurs with other mental health disorders. So it's important to be able to kind of look at all the different aspects of what's going on with the person, and not just treating the one and forgetting about the other, because in the end, the one will lead to a relapse in either side. Like if we only focus on the depression, but we don't address the substances, eventually, that they kind of trigger each other. So we have to work with all of that together. And then another important fact is that we need to engage in long-term care, long-term aftercare. So a lot of studies have been done. The longer we stay within a treatment setting, okay, and that doesn't mean like I'm an inpatient in an inpatient rehab or even an outpatient. It is, I've done inpatient, I maybe scaled down to outpatient, I'm seeing a psychologist or a social worker or an addictions counselor, I'm going to support groups, and then kind of continuing with that, like kind of maybe not doing the, like you start seeing your therapist for, every week, and then it's like every second week, once a month, whatever. But you also have the support group that helps you to stay in recovery and keeps you on track as you go. Yeah, so what does recovery look like? Okay, recovery is not just about putting down the drugs. It's really about creating a life where there's no room for the addiction. So we do that through creating new routines and structures, building healthier relationships, incorporating and learning some new ways to regulate our emotions, trying to find some purpose and meaning. And quite often we get that through that contribution and helping others, volunteer work, whatever that is. Getting to that place of realizing that I need ongoing support, okay? So it's not like you're going to help me for 6 weeks in treatment and then like I'm ace, you don't need to worry about me. I'm a little bit of a lone ranger, but I got that quite clearly when I was in rehab, that it's really important to be able to ask for help. And most of us, regardless of whether you have an addiction or not have an addiction, it's really difficult for us to actually ask for help. And it's one of those key things that is our lifeline, that if things are really not feeling great, that we are able to reach out to people. And the easiest people to reach out to are the people that we actually foster, healthy relationships with, and that we trust, in order to be able to reach out when things get tough. And that what we're working towards, okay, instead of saying I'm an addict and I'm a mess and I don't deserve this and all of that, it's about I'm a person in recovery, I deserve a healthy life. So we actually want to shift that to, and it's really what I did in terms of like I'm just so passionate about helping people, and I want to be in recovery, and I want other people to be in recovery, and I want people to know that it's possible to be in recovery as we go forward. So our brain does heal over time. So I mean, I think like 20 plus years ago, we didn't really believe a lot of that, but there's been a lot of research on how we can get better, how the brain develops, neuroplasticity and all of that. And within 3 to 12 months after giving up substances, our brain does show significant recovery. Our decision-making does improve over time. Our stress system does stabilize. Cravings reduce. So with what I was thinking about this as well, when I put it up there, it's like, I mean, I can remember feeling like such a I felt like, yeah, I don't know how to say this in a polite way. I felt a bit doof, okay, when I got into recovery. Like the drugs had really numbed everything. I was quite slow on thinking things through, and I was very upset about it. Okay, and I was told that just kind of trust the process; that it'll get better. And over time, it did get better. And over time, I actually started trusting my brain to go and study. Okay, and then it was like, wow, look, okay, you can study, which is great. And then with the decision making, I also realized, like, because I cleaned up through like a 12-step way, and we have sponsors, and it's so important to ask for help and all of that. The key thing there, if you link this to the neuroscience, okay, until our brains recover and we are able to make healthy decisions, it's good to actually check with someone else what's going on. So it's like an accountability partner or having a mentor, okay? So it doesn't have to be a sponsor in AA as such or anywhere like that, but it's about checking your thinking whilst you are being kind and gentle with your brain as it recovers if you've damaged it. And I mean, I can remember being extremely stressed and anxious in my first year in recovery. And I stopped, so I spoke to people, I spoke to my sponsor, I did a lot of breathing exercises, I did some yoga, I stopped drinking coffee, all in order to kind of stabilize my nervous system in order to not feel so anxious the whole time and put myself at risk. So what stops us from getting help in South Africa? Like the big thing is stigma. So people maybe know that they have a problem or they know their loved one is a problem, but like they don't want to tell anyone, okay, because they feel like they're going to get judged. The second thing is cost. It can be quite expensive. However, there are alternatives. It comes with a long waiting list sometimes, okay, because we've got limited public resources, but it doesn't mean that you shouldn't engage in the process of eventually getting there. And even whilst we're waiting for a bed at a state facility, we do have SADC, NA, all of those places where people can go to get support until they can get the inpatient support. People have complained about uneven service delivery, and then they say, well, what's the point? Why am I going to send my loved one to rehab? Nothing ever happens. They just come out the same way. And the reality is that, these are systems failures, not personal failures. You can actually put someone wanting recovery into any one of the treatment centers, and if they act that, like they talk about the like the stages of change, okay, which is what gets us to, am I ready to clean up now? So we don't want to, like, we don't want them to get to a place of being down and out and almost dying before getting in there. But every time someone goes into rehab, even if they don't stay clean, they would have learned something within this, okay? So it is about not giving up and actually helping people to get the help that they need. So what needs to change? We need to reduce stigma. We need to use person first language, not calling them, oh, those addicts or whatever. We need to intervene early. We need to support multiple recovery pathways. And we need to expand the proven models nationally. And so I mentioned those earlier. It's really about we want people to be a bit more open about what's going on. We want everyone to be a bit more curious about, what's happening with their loved ones, as opposed to just going hush hush and let's not say anything. And it's to actually be open-minded to what else is out there that I can maybe afford or that's accessible now, whilst I wait for a bed later on. You can go to the next one. I see we're almost at our time. So where can we get help? SANCA, I've got a resource. There's a resource list there under resources that you'll find on the webinar somewhere. SANCA, SADC, Department of Social Development, Lifeline, AA, NAGA. Go on to psychology today. There's lots of counselors, psychologists, social workers. Go to your hospital there and ask to see a psychiatrist, psychologist. Help exists out there. It's just about reaching out and getting that. Next one. So where can we learn more about? So because also the more we understand addiction, the easier it is for us to help. SACAP Global has got courses. I'll tell you a bit more after that, after this slide. SADAC has got amazing information on their website. SANCA's got amazing information on their website. There's also the Addiction Counselors Certifications of South Africa that you can go and get an addictions counseling certification. Knowledge is power, okay? And even what's not on here is that sometimes people also run other sort of things, okay? Other interesting talks. The more curious we are, the more we understand, the easier it is going to be for us to be able to help. I mean, SACAP Global offers micro skills courses, okay? And these, there are 2 addictions counseling courses that are starting on the 9th of March. Very, very comprehensive, self-paced, well, it's not self-paced, you do it over a couple of weeks, okay? But online learning, and it provides you with skills and practical knowledge, okay, of how we can survive this world that we are in. There are also a wide range of other courses available. Good. So please, will you follow us on social media? Please follow us on there. And yeah, thank you very much for joining and for listening. I hope this has left you with something to hold on to and to inspire you, and hope to see you maybe in one of the addictions counseling courses at some point. Thanks.